Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Numbers chapter 19, verse 1 through chapter 20, verse 29. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron. This is the ordinance of the law which the Lord has commanded. Instruct the Israelites to bring you a red heifer without blemish, which has no defect and has never carried a yoke. You must give it to Eleazar the priest, so that he can take it outside the camp, and it must be slaughtered before him. Eleazar the priest is to take some of its blood with his finger, and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times directly in front of the tent of meeting. Then the heifer must be burned in his sight. Its skin, its flesh, its blood, and its offal is to be burned. And the priest must take cedar wood, hyssop, and scarlet wool, and throw them in the midst of the fire where the heifer is burning. Then the priest must wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and afterward he may come into the camp. But the priest will be ceremonially unclean until evening. The one who burns it must wash his clothes in water and bathe himself in water. He will be ceremonially unclean until evening. Then a man who is ceremonially clean must gather up the ashes of the red heifer and put them in a ceremonially clean place outside the camp. They must be kept for the community of the Israelites for use in the water of purification. It is a purification for sin. The one who gathers the ashes of the heifer must wash his clothes and be ceremonially unclean until evening. This will be a permanent ordinance both for the Israelites and the resident foreigner who lives among them. Whoever touches the corpse of any person will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days. He must purify himself with water on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and so will be clean. But if he does not purify himself on the 3rd day and the 7th day, then he will not be clean. Anyone who touches the corpse of any dead person and does not purify himself defiles the tabernacle of the Lord, and that person must be cut off from Israel. Because the water of purification was not sprinkled on him, he will be unclean. His uncleanness remains on him. This is the law. When a man dies in a tent, anyone who comes into the tent, and all who are in the tent will be ceremonially unclean 7 days. And every open container that has no covering fashioned on it is unclean. And whoever touches the body of someone killed with a sword in the open fields, or the body of someone who died of natural causes, or a human bone, or a grave, will be unclean 7 days. For a ceremonially unclean person, you must take some of the ashes of the heifer, burnt for purification from sin, and pour fresh running water over them in a vessel. Then a ceremonially clean person must take hyssop, dip it in the water, and sprinkle it on the tent, on all its furnishings, and on the people who were there, or on the one who touched a bone, or one killed, or one who died, or a grave. And the clean person must sprinkle the unclean on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day, and on the 7th day he must purify him, and then he must wash his clothes and bathe in water, and he will be clean in the evening. But the man who is unclean and does not purify himself, that person must be cut off from among the community, because he has polluted the sanctuary of the Lord. The water of purification was not sprinkled on him, so he is unclean. So this will be a perpetual ordinance for them. The one who sprinkles the water of purification must wash his clothes, and the one who touches the water of purification will be unclean until evening. And whatever the unclean person touches will be unclean, and the person who touches it will be unclean until evening. Then the entire community of Israel entered the wilderness of Zin in the 1st month, and the people stayed in Kadesh. Miriam died and was buried there, and there was no water for the community, and so they gathered themselves together against Moses and Aaron. The people contended with Moses, saying, "If only we had died when our brothers died before the Lord. Why have you brought up the Lord's community into this wilderness, so that we and our cattle should die here? Why have you brought us up from Egypt, only to bring us to this dreadful place? It is no place for grain, or figs, or vines, or pomegranates, nor is there any water to drink." So Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance to the tent of meeting. They then threw themselves down with their faces to the ground, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Take the staff and assemble the community, you and Aaron your brother, and then speak to the rock before their eyes. It will pour forth its water, and you will bring water out of the rock for them, and so you will give the community and their beasts water to drink." So Moses took the staff from before the Lord, just as he commanded him. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the community together in front of the rock, and he said to them, "Listen, you rebels, must we bring water out of this rock for you?" Then Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his staff, and water came out abundantly. So the community drank, and their beasts drank too. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, "Because you did not trust me enough to show me as holy before the Israelites, therefore you will not bring this community into the land I have given them. These are the waters of Meribah, because the Israelites contended with the Lord, and his holiness was maintained among them." Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom. "Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the hardships we have experienced, how our ancestors went down into Egypt, and we lived in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians treated us and our ancestors badly. So when we cried to the Lord, he heard our voice and sent a messenger, and has brought us up out of Egypt. Now we are in Kadesh. We are here in Kadesh, a town on the edge of your country. Please let us pass through your country. We will not pass through the fields or through the vineyards, nor will we drink water from any well. We will go by the king's highway. We will not turn to the right or to the left until we have passed through your region." But Edom said to him, "You will not pass through me, or I will come out against you with the sword." Then the Israelites said to him, "We will go along the highway, and if we or our cattle drink any of your water, we will pay for it. We will only pass through on our feet without doing anything else." But he said, "You may not pass through." Then Edom came out against them with a large and powerful force. So Edom refused to give Israel passage through his border. Therefore Israel turned away from him. So the entire company of Israelites traveled from Kadesh and came to Mount Hor. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in Mount Hor, by the border of the land of Edom. He said, "Aaron will be gathered to his ancestors, for he will not enter into the land I have given to the Israelites, because both of you have rebelled against my word at the waters of Meribah. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son, and bring them up on Mount Hor. Remove Aaron's priestly garments and put them on Eleazar his son, and Aaron will be gathered to his ancestors, and so will die there." So Moses did as the Lord commanded, and they went up Mount Hor in the sight of the whole community. And Moses removed Aaron's garments and put them on his son Eleazar. So Aaron died there on the top of the mountain, and Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. When all the community saw that Aaron was dead, the whole house of Israel mourned for Aaron 30 days. Yeah, so let's see here. You have the red heifer here, the ordinance of the red heifer established, and what should be done regarding those who touch a dead body and are ceremonially unclean. And then the death of Miriam, which is a footnote, I guess, compared to the others here, but is mentioned. Then the Israelites grumbling at Meribah, and God telling Moses and Aaron to speak to the rock to bring forth water. Moses instead strikes the rock twice. And for that he's not allowed to enter into the promised land. And then the death of Aaron and the passing on of his priestly role to his son, Eleazar. The red heifer would be sacrificed in the customary fashion, with a bit of blood being sprinkled on the altar, yet the complete carcass of the animal was burnt, and the ashes gathered by one observing the cleansing ceremonies before and after the gathering of the ashes. Its blood shall be burned. Unlike every other sacrifice in the Old Testament, the blood of the red heifer is burnt along with the sacrifice, instead of being completely drained out at the jugular. Blood was to be part of the ashes that would come forth from the burning of the carcass of the red heifer. And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet, and cast them in the midst of the fire, burning the heifer. When the heifer was burnt, The priest would also put cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet into the fire. In Leviticus 14, 4-6, each of these 3 items are used in the cleansing ceremony for a leper. Each of these items has a special significance. Cedar is extremely resistant to disease and rot and is well known for its quality and preciousness. These properties may be the reason for including it here, as well as a symbolic reference to the wood of the cross. Some even think the cross Jesus was crucified on was made of cedar. Hyssop was used not only with the cleansing ceremony for lepers, but also Jesus was offered a drink from a hyssop branch on the cross. And when David said, "Purge me with hyssop," he was admitting he was as bad as a leper. Scarlet, the color of blood, pictures the cleansing blood of Jesus on the cross. Scarlet was used in the veil and curtains of the tabernacle, in the garments of the high priest, the covering for the table of the showbread, the sign of Rahab's salvation, and the color of the mocking king's robe put on Jesus at his torture by the soldiers. Then the residue from the burning of the carcass, the cedar, the hyssop, and the scarlet fabric together would produce a lot of ash, and the ash was to be gathered and sprinkled in water bit by bit to make water fit for purification. If he does not purify himself, that is, the person who touches a dead body, that person shall be cut off. One who was unclean needed purification and could not ignore their condition, but was still part of the nation, unless they refused to correct their unclean condition. This is the law when a man dies in a tent. The practice of quarantining all those who come into contact with a dead body was a wonderful public health measure as well. Those potentially contaminated would be set aside until it could be seen if they contracted a disease from the dead body. Anyone who touches a dead body shall be unclean. What was inherently unclean about a dead body? Simply that death is the result and positive proof of sin. Death is like sin made visible. If someone touched the carcass of a dead animal, he was unclean for less than 1 day. But if one touched a dead human, he was unclean for 7 days. Man is indeed greater than the animals, especially greater in sin. They shall take some of the ashes of the heifer. The ashes of the red heifer, described earlier in the chapter, were sprinkled in fresh water, and this water was used for purification. And at evening he shall be clean. Thus ashes of the red heifer, which the ingredients all speak of the work of Jesus on our behalf, combined with water, which speaks of the work of the Word of God and the Holy Spirit, combine together to bring cleansing. It can cleanse even the uncleanness brought about by death. All this cleansing is a precious picture. But the reality is in Jesus. From Hebrews 9:13 and 14, "For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctifies for the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God." Whatever the unclean person touches shall be unclean. Uncleanness was easily transmitted, but cleanness had to be deliberately sought. Yeah, isn't that the truth? Miriam died there and was buried there. Miriam's death was an important point in the journey from Egypt to Canaan. She was the first of Moses' siblings to die in the wilderness, and her death was an important demonstration of the fulfillment of what God promised, that the generation which refused to enter Canaan would die in the wilderness, and the new generation would enter instead. Miriam's death shows us that there were no special exceptions for the family of Moses. God said only Joshua and Caleb would survive from that generation, and that included Miriam, Aaron, and even Moses himself. This chapter will show the frailty of each of these giants in the account of the Exodus. Many people still deceive themselves into thinking they have a special exception from God, believing they are a special case with their own special arrangement with the Lord. If Moses and his siblings had no special deal, we should not be so arrogant to think we have our own deal with God. Miriam died there and was buried there. Miriam died a complex character. She was great for her courage in assisting Moses and his parents, and great for her leading Israel in praise, but she was also disgraced for her rebellion against Moses. One incident of rebellion left a black mark on her whole life. Yeah. And I think this too also demonstrates that each of us needs to get right with God. It's not as though Miriam or Aaron here could slide by Moses' good character, but each one needed to get right with God. So, and yeah. There was no water for the congregation. The need was real, but the response of Israel was filled with unbelief and bad attitude, which always go together. When you find a bad attitude, you will also find a lack of simple, secure trust in God. If only we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. Their contention led them to outrageous statements, words lacking any trust in God. The older generation of unbelief was almost dead, and now the younger generation started to act like the unbelieving generation. They openly doubted God's promise that he would lead them into the land of promise. Their contentions lead them to outrageous accusations. The new generation accuses Moses, just as the generation of unbelief did. Take the rod and speak to the rock before their eyes. Specifically, God told Moses to take the rod, but not to use it. Water would be provided if Moses would speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water. Back at Mount Sinai, God told Moses to strike the rock, and water came forth. But now he was merely to speak to the rock, yet with the rod in his hand. The rod was a symbol of his authority from God. So Moses took the rod before the Lord as he commanded him. Moses began by doing exactly what the Lord had told him to do. Take the rod and gather the people of Israel. Hear now, you rebels, must we bring water for you out of this rock? God did not command him to speak to the nation, and to speak so severely to the nation, yet Moses did. Moses, after doing what God had told him to do, then did something God had not told him to do. He lectured the nation. Worse, he lectured the nation with an attitude of heart he had not shown before, one of anger and contempt for the people of God, with a bitter heart. Before, Moses fell on his face before God when the people rebelled. At Marah, when the people contended with Moses because the waters were bitter, Moses cried out to the Lord, not against the people. When the people did need to be boldly confronted, Moses did it, as at Massah and Meribah, but without the edge of anger, contempt, and bitterness we see here. There are 100 explanations for Moses' frustration here. Psalm 106, 32 through 33 describes how the people provoked Moses here, but not a single excuse. Worse yet, Moses not only took the rebellion of the people against the Lord too personally, he also over-magnified his own partnership with God. Must we bring water for you out of this rock? Moses spoke as if he and God would do the job, as if they divided the work 50-50, as if God couldn't bring water unless he was around to speak to the rock. His lapse into contempt for the people led him into a lapse of subtle pride. Yeah, each of us stands before the Lord in the same position, one of sinners redeemed by grace. So we ought not to think too highly of ourselves. And I think this is also a warning against growing bitter and angry type thing of Yeah, like Moses was focused on the bad and of the people and not focused on the goodness of God. And I don't know, it seems like he lost some of that intercessory character that he showed previously. It turned into God and him against the people when that wasn't God's plan. Yet, despite Moses' lapse into sinful attitude and action, God still provided abundantly for the people. This teaches us that God's love for his people is so great that he will use very imperfect instruments. And the fact that God uses someone is no evidence to themselves or to the people that they are really right with God or ministering according to God's heart. Yeah, God can speak through Balaam as well as he can speak through Moses. God would deal with Moses, but the people needed water, and so it was provided. Moses might have come away thinking he did right, and the people probably thought so as well, because what Moses did seemed to work. But what works is not the best measure of what is right before God. Yeah. And as was stated earlier, the bad attitude and unbelief going hand in hand. God calls out Moses here for his unbelief. Because you did not believe me. Moses' sinful attitude and action was rooted in unbelief. He didn't really believe God when the Lord told him to speak to the rock and not to strike it. Unbelief has many forms. It was easy to see Israel's unbelief in Numbers 14 when they refused to trust God and enter the promised land. Here, Moses was also unbelieving, but in different circumstances. Moses did not trust God to correct his people and took it upon himself to do so when God did not want to correct Israel. To hallow me in the eyes of the children of Israel. What Moses did was an unholy thing. He made God look no different than an angry man or one of the temperamental pagan gods. He did not reflect the heart and character of God before the people. Therefore, you shall not bring this congregation into the land. God's correction of Moses was hard. He would not lead Israel into the promised land, that which he dreamed of and felt called to even as a child in the palaces of Egypt, to deliver God's people, would not be completed. Another person would finish the job. This was only painful because of Moses' faithful heart. An unfaithful man is not pained at the idea that he cannot complete what God had called him to. You shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. This may seem an excessively harsh punishment for Moses. It seems that with only one slip-up, he now had to die short of the promised land. But Moses was being judged by a stricter standard because of his leadership position within the nation, and because he had a uniquely close relationship with God. It is right for teachers and leaders to be judged by a stricter standard, though it is unrighteous to hold teachers and leaders to a perfect standard. It is true the people's conduct was worse than Moses, but it is irrelevant. Worst of all, Moses defaced a beautiful picture of Jesus' redemptive work through the rock which provided water in the wilderness. The New Testament makes it clear this water-providing, life-giving rock was a picture of Jesus. Jesus, being struck once, provided life for all who would drink of him. But it was unnecessary and unrighteous that Jesus would be struck again, much less again twice, because the Son of God needed only to suffer once. Yeah. And then you have messengers to the king of Edom. Edom being a descendant of Esau, which you had Abraham having Isaac, and then Isaac having Jacob and Esau. Jacob becoming Israel, and Esau becoming Edom here. So these are their brothers, though separated by a period of several hundred years. And it appears in the meantime that Edom has no interest in helping his brother. Yeah, all Moses asked for on behalf of Israel was the permission to pass through. They expected no provision from the Edomites because they trusted God to provide for all their needs. But Edom refused. You shall not pass through my land, lest I come out against you with the sword. This was an unnecessary refusal. It would have cost Edom nothing and been a genuine gesture of goodwill. But the Edomites, perhaps out of suspicion or fear, refused. So Israel turned away from him. This refusal made the journey of the children of Israel much more discouraging and dangerous. But there seems to be no record of God punishing Edom for this sin. In fact, Israel was still commanded to treat the Edomite as a brother. God here shows Israel how to leave the judgment of those who hurt you up to the Lord, and how to love those who have acted as enemies against you, even if they were brothers. And then the death of Aaron. Then the children of Israel, the whole congregation, journeyed from Kadesh and came to Mount Hor. Here, a definite marker indicating the end of the 38 years Israel had been sentenced to in the wilderness. Numbers 33:38 tells us Aaron died there in the 40th year after the children of Israel had come out of the land of Egypt. There is very little record of what happened during these years. They are compressed into only 5 1/2 chapters, while the single year at Mount Sinai is given almost 50 chapters. This was to demonstrate these years accomplished nothing, except the death of the generation of unbelief. These were just years of surviving in the desert, wasted years waiting for the old man to die. During those 38 years, there was much movement, but no progress. Our walk with God can be the same way. And Aaron died there on top of the mountain. The passing of Aaron is a huge landmark in the history of Israel. He was the first high priest of the nation, and yet not exempt from the decree that his generation would perish in the wilderness. Aaron died there on the top of the mountain. Aaron died as a great but complex figure, even more so than Miriam. He was used of God mightily, as Moses' partner, to initiate the priesthood, and to plead with Moses for the people. At the same time, he was instrumental in the grotesque debacle of the golden calf, and in challenging Moses' authority with his sister Miriam. Aaron's life shows us, among other things, that the office is more important than the man himself. Aaron the man was not always worthy of respect, but Aaron the high priest always was worthy of honor. Yeah. Also interesting to me, too, that the death of the high priest corresponds with the people entering into the promised land. So I'm reminded of like the death of the righteous atoning type thing. Anywho, carrying on here, Psalm 55, verses 1 through 23. Listen, O God, to my prayer. Do not ignore my appeal for mercy. Pay attention to me and answer me. I am so upset and distressed, I am beside myself, because of what the enemy says and because of how the wicked pressure me. For they hurl trouble down upon me and angrily attack me. My heart beats violently within me. The horrors of death overcome me. Fear and panic overpower me. Terror overwhelms me. I say, I wish I had wings like a dove. I would fly away and settle in a safe place. Look, I will escape to a distant place. I will stay in the wilderness. I will hurry off to a place that is safe from the strong wind and the gale. Confuse them, O Lord, frustrate their plans, for I see violence and conflict in the city. Day and night they walk around on its walls, while wickedness and destruction are within it. Disaster is within it. Violence and deceit do not depart from its public square. Indeed, it is not an enemy who insults me, or else I could bear it. It is not one who hates me, who arrogantly taunts me, or else I could hide from him. But it is you, a man like me, my close friend in whom I confided. We would share personal thoughts with each other in God's temple. We would walk together among the crowd. May death destroy them. May they go down alive into Sheol, for evil is in their dwelling place and in their midst. As for me, I will call out to God, and the Lord will deliver me. During the evening, morning, and noontime I will lament and moan, and he will hear me. He will rescue me and protect me from those who attack me, even though they greatly outnumber me. God, the one who is raised as king from long ago, will hear and humiliate them. They refuse to change and do not fear God. He attacks his friends. He breaks his solemn promises to them. His words are as smooth as butter, but he harbors animosity in his heart. His words seem softer than oil, but they are really like sharp swords. Throw your burden upon the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never allow the godly to be upended. But you, O God, will bring them down to the deep pit. Violent and deceitful people will not live even half a normal lifespan, but as for me, I trust in you. Yeah. The start of this, an introduction from Guzik here. The psalm describes a time of some kind of rebellion or power struggle against David, and a key leader in the struggle was a trusted associate who betrayed David. The city is dangerous because of the rebellion, and David cries out to God. Most commentators fit this psalm to Absalom's rebellion, and the trusted associate as Ahithophel. Parts of this psalm seem to fit Absalom's rebellion, but some parts don't. It's hard to imagine David wishing Absalom to hell, when he didn't even want him to die. It may be that the events connected with this psalm are unrecorded in the sacred history of the life of David. Yeah. But Psalm 55:22 stands out to me. That is, throw your burden upon the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never allow the godly to be upended. The New Testament also says, cast our cares upon him, for he cares for us, for you. And then finally, Proverbs chapter 11, verse 7. When a wicked person dies, his expectation perishes, and the hope of his strength perishes. Yeah. It echoes a lot of Ecclesiastes there. That is, that everything done under the sun is vanity, ultimately purposeless. Which is to say that one should get his purpose in Christ, because if one finds purpose in a life apart from God, ultimately death will end that. Anywho, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.